Good night. Good night. How
Yes,
is everybody?
yes,
As well,
great.
Marcia. The audience. Sorry, I missed out last night. It was a very hectic night, but a hectic couple of days actually. So that's why I got here. Um, tad late too, but nevertheless, happy to be here. It's the end of the year. We had a very good rally. Uh, for 2023. So I'm very happy. Coming from the marches, speaking. Uh, no, our show is now taken over the airwaves by storm. Right?
Yeah, as you said that, I put out a short 7 minutes video on Mr. Franklin this morning. My editor, another young person, let me tell you, them young people, them serious. Quickly, he did it up for me. And would you believe by this evening, I think it could have been about 3 o'clock or a little near 4 o'clock. I looked at it and it was over 2,000 views.
Yeah.
So you're right. You continue, Kimar.
Yeah. So I'm glad for that. Um, I This evening, as you say, my presentation is about the Barbados economy in review. Um, I was going to do slides with my own information, but what I'm going to do is to show you official documentation from the IMF and official documentation from the report to Congress, official documentation from the Central Bank of Barbados, as opposed to me showing you my slides, because I want Barbadians to firmly grasp that this economy is not well. Barbados is not well, right? And it's not working for us in the majority. It's working for a few. You know, we got a situation where there seems to be a kickback scenario going on, and we also have scenarios where other ministers have been involved in questionable scenarios, but the prosecution seems to be never happening. And if you have Darren Donny, a man who was relieved from the police force for allegations of wiretapping and phone tapping, and he's now back in the government as a consultant, and he's now the head of the anti-corruption unit. And this was a man that was fired for wiretapping. And a man who was fired for wiretapping is now the head of the anti-corruption unit in Barbados. So if he investigates, if he investigates her, we all know what's going to happen, right? Yes. So I guess I could jump right in now. Um, I'm going to start with the report of the IMF. So I'm going to show my screen here, to the people so that you can see um, things. So I'm going to go through not the entire thing because it's fairly long, right? It's very, very long actually. So I'm going to go through it and show you exactly where I am coming from with this one. Just give me a chance to get it set up properly here. Oh shoot, wrong one. All right, just give me 1 second. 1 second.
Yes, while he's doing that, guys, good evening to us. See, a lot of people have joined us. We started off with 150 something persons. Now we were over 300. And so I'm going to ask you, first of all, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. It's Saturday evening. You could be doing so many different things. I'm going to ask you to share this live this evening, and also to like it. You will see that little you will see a little what am I saying? A little hand there, a thumbs up. You're right. So you can basically do your just click on the thumbs up and that you get to like it, and that's good. The algorithm that works well because then people can find us. All right. And then on the right hand side, you will see a bell, and that's your subscription. That's where you decide that you want to subscribe to us. You click on that and it will walk you through what you have to do. It's very simple. All right. On the screen, we want to continue to promote um, the march that is coming up on January 13th, which says everything is about change, and this march, has to do with the ID, and where we are, Barbadians are very concerned about the ID, the current ID. The deadline is supposed to be January 31st, and so we're going to hit the streets again. And they should know that we didn't finish. As they say, if we were done, we just a come. So they should have known that, right? So that is everything is about the change. Um, that is our march that is coming up. Massacre Park, 10 o'clock on December 13th. All roads lead there. Come up, guys. We've got to let them know how we feel. Yes? Are you ready, Kimar?
Yeah, very ready.
Yeah. Yes, go right ahead.
Hey. Yeah, so I'm gonna put it on my screen here. Tell me when you can see it. You can see it.
In here, tell me when you can see it.
Right. So my screen here should have. You can see something about the IMF, an official report from the IMF.
No, it started to come up, but okay. So somehow we're not seeing it. I'm not sure based or what. Yeah.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna try it one more time. Okay. Um. hmm.
It started being added, and then we didn't see it.
Whoa. All right. All right, but we're gonna work around that. I'm gonna put up something here. Right. So I have you can see something now.
It's coming up. It's coming up. Yes, yes, we can see it. Go right ahead.
Right. So basically, what I want to show you here is the statement from the IMF. Um, the last review that the IMF did in December. Right. So just follow my screen. That you can notice it. That you can see it.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Let me. I'm going to show you something quickly here. On the left hand side, you can see that there's a guy called Patrick Balgrave, who's the resident representative of the IMF. Right? Many people may not know this, but the IMF actually established an official office in the Central Bank of Barbados. Right? And in that office, this guy here is the liaison between the IMF. But the IMF never had an office here, but they do know. And that's a recent change, Um, and this guy, there had someone there before him, but he left, and this guy is a new hire. And there's space in the office for what we call a local economist, a local Barbadian who would be the liaison between the local operation, the local economy, and the International Monetary Fund, right? However, when you try to contact the IMF's office using any of these contact information here, they would tell you specifically that you need to go through the government of Barbados to speak to them. Right? So if the government does not approve, you cannot speak to the representatives of the IMF, as it seems. Right? Um, that's very strange. Obviously, the IMF is going to be in Barbados to about 2050. That's 2050, 50. And we are now in 2023. So the IMF has at least 27 more years in Barbados. Um,
Wow.
and I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you along the way in the presentation um, exactly why it was said that. 'Cause I'm going to show you a screen of the loan arrangements, the payback periods, so that you will see exactly why I said what I said. The debt arrangement for Barbados is supposed to end, well, not end, but come down to 60% of GDP by 2035, right? But that's only 60%. That doesn't mean that you don't owe the IMF. You still owe them, right? Um, so 2050. So just trying to get the other information put on the screen that you can see. But again, a bit of trouble with the slides. I don't know what is happening here really. Um, it doesn't want to show no. Oh. All right, we're gonna skip past this part and go on to Congress here that you can see. Right. So Congress, I think we did this one on the show before. We spoke about this. The Barbados government is now directly reporting to the U.S. Congress, and on the screen you can see here clearly. And you're going to zoom in. You can see here clearly loans to Barbados and Suriname. Because it was a joint report. Now I can't tell you why Barbados and Suriname is jointly reporting on its debts together. I honestly can't explain that. I would like to know why, but I don't have the explanation. So this report here is the report that was submitted to Congress on behalf of Barbados and Suriname. The reason why Barbados is reporting to Congress is because we owe the IMF, basically, and the IMF is a institution mandated under what you see here, which is called the Dodd-Frank rules, right? The multilateral system that the Prime Minister now is out there championing reform for, right? So the IMF, the World Bank, the IDB, the European Investment Bank, the Dodd-Frank uh, rules would impact on them, right? I won't go into what the Dodd-Frank is because that's a little bit too technical of an explanation. But it says here in the introduction that the report provides an assessment of the likelihood that Barbados and Suriname will repay their loans to the IMF in full. And the report is required by Section 1501 of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. It says both countries meet the reporting criteria specified in that specific legislation and both receive loans at a time when the most recent data established their public debt to GDPs were greater than 100%. Right? Uh, and neither is eligible for assistance from the International Development Association because your debt was definitely too high. Right? So you would hear Kevin Greenwich, Marsha Cattle, everybody saying that we got to focus on debt sustainability and reducing debt. Now, when you reduce the debt, the government is seeking to have benefits like grant assistance, right? Um, so you would hear the Prime Minister saying that Barbados, as a developing country, has to borrow under the conditions for a developed country because we don't qualify for aid based off Barbados does not qualify for aid based off the fact that our uh, per capita income is too high. Per capita income is basically like the average earning rate for like what the countries earn on average, right? Um, Hello, sorry about that. Right. So right, the per capita income of Barbados is too high. So every country has a measurement. So like the average income, average collective income for every country. There are specific thresholds based off the IMF, the World Bank, the CDB. These places will give you thresholds that if your per capita income is below a specific amount, you will get grant income and uh, subsidized loans. They call it subsidized loans, but that's not the correct word. But just trying to paraphrase, subsidized loans. But Barbados does not get that. We have to borrow on the market like all of the other countries, right? So when we us having that particular debt profile, the IMF is the only institution that is lending Barbados any money. So you could search around, look around, research it, whatever. Besides the Chinese government and the Canadian government, the IMF is one of Barbados' biggest lenders, the IDB, the CDB, the multilateral banks, which countries like America has major stake in. Right? So all of these are factors why Barbados now has to be reporting to the US Congress. Right? So when people speak about moving away from trade with the US Barbados moving away from trade with the US dollar and us doing less US transactions, that's a myth. That's not going to happen anytime soon because you clearly see now where we're at. So the Prime Minister has to go to America quite regular now, Washington, to meet with Joe Biden, to meet with Kamala Harris, to meet with Congress, to meet with all of these different people because America has one of the biggest share percentages in the IMF. So therefore, we don't have to go and report everything that we do to America, right? We keep speaking about sovereignty on the show. That's what we call loss of sovereignty. Before 2018, we didn't have that, right? Barbados still had its sovereignty as it relates to borrowing relationships, right? We didn't have the conditionalities, and I'm going to get to those in a bit. We didn't have the conditionalities that we have right now. We had before. We have some really strange conditionalities like reforming the NAS and cutting state-owned enterprises and doing all of these things that don't necessarily benefit the people. We can clearly see why here because again, Barbados has to go to America, to Congress, to put basically a portfolio before them and the IMF that they would approve. So that is why Chris Sinclair now works. That's why Chris Sinclair now works in Washington, right? And he's there negotiating on behalf of the entire Caribbean. He's here negotiating on behalf of Canada and other places because there was a vacancy for the job because of the arrangements Barbados entered into with the IMF and Washington and Congress and these people. So he's the liaison man between America and the Caribbean, Barbados and the Caribbean. Barbados being the main point to our prime minister, and we saw it with the jobs as well, where Barbados was the main collection agency for everything, and then we would distribute out throughout other Caribbean countries, right? So that's mainly why Mr. Sinclair um, is there, right? So just giving you that background. So Barbados went to Congress and said that they completed. Sorry, trying to scroll down here. Right. So Barbados went to Congress, uh, presenting their thing. So it says here clearly. I hope everybody could see. It says Barbados has struggled to break free from a vicious cycle of low or negative growth since 2008, 2009 global financial crisis. Right. And around 2018, the public debt to GDP of Barbados was around 160% of the GDP, right? And that's when we entered the first IMF program in 2018, right? Then we had COVID after that. And this was the debt restructuring that we had. Then we had COVID after the debt restructuring. So automatically during the debt restructuring, you can get a growth, right? Then you got COVID, then the economy tanked a lot more, right? So you will see that when they start to show you the documentation from the central bank, right? So I hope you're seeing what I'm showing you here clearly, quoted directly from Congress, right? So it gives you an explanation here about what the IMF program would have been about, right? It says that the main pillars of the IMF program was for government to adopt what you call a primary surplus of 6% of GDP. A primary surplus. Now, I don't want to get too technical with the terms to lose the loyal opposition here. I want you to follow me. A primary surplus is what government makes minus what government spends. Right? So the government was seeking to make 6% more, right, than it spends. So the government, we call it surplus or revenue. The government was seeking to have a 6% balance the budget. So you bring it back to zero, make sure what you're spending equals what you collect, and then you increase that by 6%. That's the government's target under the IMF program. How does the government make money? Taxation, right? The government taxes Barbadians to get revenue, to get surplus. So to get a 6% surplus, right? Taxes. You gotta add taxes. So that is why you pay the garbage and sewage tax. That's why you pay all of these tourism taxes, these high level income taxes. That's why we pay absurd amount of VAT, right? And that we call increasing revenues. That's how the government increase revenues. On the other side of that is the expenditure side, where the government now has to cut. So if they don't want to increase, if you don't want to increase taxes to increase revenues, then the other option is to cut. Cuts. So if you want to raise $200 million in taxes, but the population can't take no more taxes, well, your only other option is $200 million in cuts to budgets, cuts to ministries, cuts. And you see right in here, and I'm pointing at it here. I'm gonna show you with the mouse right here. I'm gonna try to zoom in a bit more. It says right here, state-owned enterprise reforms to reduce transfers that have become a significant burden on the budget. Right? That simply means cut water authority, cut transport board, cut NAS, any state-owned enterprise that the government runs, that the government has to give money over to already IMF and the economists and the accountants called transfers. You don't have to cut those transfers, right? You got to reduce the amount of money that central government spends to run government enterprises. So that is why privatization is a thing in Barbados. Do not forget that the government rolled out a survey, Ryan Strong specifically, which asked the people of Barbados to classify state-owned enterprises. And under the Public Financial Management Act, all of them were classified either as essential, non-essential, commercial, right? So all of the commercial ones, and there's a list of commercial ones, I'm going to try to show you that before I'm finished. There's a list of commercial government-owned enterprises. And all, if not most of those enterprises have to be privatized because the government has to increase revenues to be able to meet this IMF surplus target right here. It says it right here, right? So the idea is for government to stop funding them directly by the transfers and encourage them to charge user fees or point fees, right? So water authority, in order to right size the water authority sells water. So you got to increase the price of the water, right? You got to cut what they call the wastage in it, or you got to introduce another product to be sold, right? So that the government could take its hands, according to what they promised them, have to take their hands out of these commercial enterprises and allow the private sector to run them. So that is basically what has been happening in Barbados through the last year and the last IMF program that we had, right? To move on from this part here, right? And I just want to bring you down right here to the last number 5 for presentation purposes. It says growth-oriented reforms aimed at supporting both the traditional and non-traditional private sector. Right, so all I just explained to you, you see it right here in number 5, that the government is providing the specific reforms to its own operations, right, to claw back, to allow the private players to get involved, right? So that is dangerous because in Barbados, our economy, our independence economy, not the republic economy, the independence economy was built on the provision of social services in the country, right? So that is why welfare and stuff like that, those programs, free school meals, subsidized housing, those programs were made and the government funded them to help the people progress or develop themselves. But what the IMF is saying now, right, is that no, the government does not need to take care of people at that level, right? So what the government has been doing is to changing the outlook as to how much assistance they would give to the population. What assistance? So education reform, that's where they're starting to cut education budgets and reform the education system to make it a more paid system that you got to pay out your own pocket. The government is not financing education straight up like that anymore. Right? That's why they put the fees back on at KFL. Healthcare started to cut the budgets already. Look at the state of the hospital. Look at the polyclinics. Right? Nurses. Look at the nurses, the treatment of the nurses. That's why the nurses can't get pay raises, because the government already agreed fundamentally with the IMF to reverse all of these ideas. So as opposed to, you think the IMF will like the entire Queen Elizabeth Hospital to be privately run, privately funded, that every single person who walks through the door of the hospital, now you gotta pay. It's according to them, it should never be free, right? So that's what the government is doing under the cloak of, we're calling it reforms. Everything is reform, 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 reform. Right? Reform, reform. It's not good reforms. Right? So you're changing what you call, as they use, subsidized living and subsidized economic activity. Right? So when the government, in economic terms, when the government get involved in an area and the government increases its investment in that area, there's something called the crowding out effect, where the government, because you can't compete with the government, every government in the area, right? Because the government has the ability to print money and get large loans and get assistance that you just can't compete with it. So if you're in the field and a product sells for $10, the government is able to sell it at 2 or give it for free. So a private player would not survive in that type of environment. So what the IMF is saying now is that the government has to stop crowding out private investment, crowding out the private sector, claw itself back to allow the private sector to take up the operations of the state-owned enterprises. Right. So I'm just moving on to the next slide quickly here. Right. So according to what the government told, or what was said at Congress, right? I'm gonna put the most right there where you want you to focus, because I know there's a lot of information, right? It says clearly in this thing that the IMF projects that the public debt has increased to 142% of GDP, mainly due to the 17% contraction in nominal GDP during the first year of the pandemic. Right? After delivering the government's targeted primary surplus of 6% in 2019, the government then went back to recording deficits or losses, right? And that the IMF now projects that the Barbados debt will reach 122% of GDP in pre-COVID levels in early 2024, right? Stick a pin there. I want you to come back up here now to where the cursor is. And look, it says here, public debt in Barbados decreased by 36 percentage points of GDP, right? Local investment. Central bank has not been repaid the money for any debt restructuring. The NAS has not been repaid the money for any debt restructuring. The people who own treasury bills were not repaid the money for debt restructuring, right? So exactly which debt did the government of Barbados pay down, right? That exactly what did they pay down that the public debt will be decreasing, right? So this is not accurate, or I won't say it's not accurate, but if you don't understand it, it would mislead you to think that the debt really going down. But it ain't really going down, because the government is not paying back anybody but the IMF, right? So it says here that the public debt decreased, but can you all, you will say Parliament, you all opposition, show me exactly who the government has been repaying? Because I could show you if I call up the bankers now, if I call up the NAS, if I call up people who had treasury bills, if I call up the people who were owed bonds, even the people joining the debt settlement bill that the government had legal claims to, the government paying them in bonds, right? So what the government is falsely doing, and they're misleading the Congress this way now. What the government is falsely doing is saying that they have been decreasing the debt to GDP. But that's not accurate. They're not doing it by cash. They're not doing it by paying on the debt. They're doing it by paying you in bonds, right? So payment in bonds is completely different to payment in cash, right? So you can see that this information here is very skewed to paint a picture that's not exactly 100% accurate, right? So they're saying that, and then on the other hand, you the people have been seeing the amount of loans that the government has been borrowing, right? You're seeing it. All right. Right. So it says here clearly, right here where the cursor, I hope you can see my cursor. It says since April 2018, external debt increased from 28% to 52% of GDP. You see how big of a jump that is? It's right here, right? Zooming in that we can get it. Zooming in that we can get it. Since April 2018, external debt increased from 28% to 52%. Right? You see how big of a jump that is? Right? So it says here that that massive increase was due to loans from international financial institutions to augment or basically build up Barbados' foreign exchange reserves. This is all of the bar reserves that we had. Right? Two, it says a decline in nominal GDP. So it shows that the economy shrank, right? So the economy was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And these are my words. I came here tonight to ensure that the people see exactly what is being said to the Congress of the United States. Decline in GDP, the economy is getting smaller, but the government is borrowing more and more and more and more and more loans, right? More and more and more loans on a smaller and smaller and smaller economy, right? It goes on here to say that the IMF projects that the public external debt will decrease to about 34% by early 2027, right? So it's going to drop from 52%, they claim, to 34%. Right? How are you going to reduce the external debt that quick by 2027? Right? 18%. 18%, So that is roughly about $1 billion and some dollars, right? That's about $1 billion and some dollars that Barbados has to pay out by 2027. Again, these are not my words. These are not my words. These are the words taken directly from the Congress of the United States. It says that the government of Barbados is seeking to pay over $1 billion back to the IMF by 2027. 2027 is the constitutional year for elections in Barbados, 5 years. If we count from 2022 when I had the last election, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. Well, that's 6. But so 2027 is when we should be having a general election. So the government of Barbados right now has to look for all of that money. This is US money, to go and repay the IMF by 2027. Right? So exactly where are we going to get all of this money from? You heard Maxine yesterday, the tourism sector is not performing. That was our main foreign exchange earner. The international business sector is falling. Not enough foreign exchange to earn from there either. Exports, not high enough to cover the shortfall. Right? All prices continue to choke us. The merchants continue to choke us. So explain to me how, right? How we're going to repay all of this money to the IMF by 2027. Right? Yeah. So that is basically where we are. So I wanted to show you. I'm gonna calm down because time is getting over. Right. This is the last piece I'm going to give you here because I gotta move on to the other piece. So it says here, look, the vulnerabilities to Barbados right now to reducing this debt is the limited implementation capacity of government, which means that the government basically can't get nothing implemented properly. That's what's being reported in Congress, that the government cannot get these things implemented properly, right? It also said there's an untested ability to maintain the fiscal discipline needed to reduce debt over a sustained period. That means that the government can agree to these specific cuts, but they can't cut because they gotta get votes, so they gotta spend the money, right? So this is what's being said in Congress. They don't know if the government can maintain the discipline to reduce the debt over that time, right? Vulnerability to external shocks. So that would just be again high oil prices, another COVID or another lockdown, pandemic, anything like that. And then they go on to say here that particularly those that affect tourism, right? And Barbados remains highly exposed to the significant risk of natural disasters. And they said this before, hurricanes and volcanic activity, right? And it said here that there are also vulnerabilities that the IMF structural reforms will not generate the forecasted benefits to growth, right? So it's all clear here. It is all clear here that through all the government is doing, that there's no guarantee that these things are going to relate to growth. And it said that the authorities have initiatives, I don't know what those were, to diversify the economy into new areas over time. Renewable energy, we know that's a failure because Lisa Cummings admitted openly that the government is not meeting renewable energy goals. High tech, well, we know how that is going. Software development to complement the traditional service sector, you know that how that is going as well, right? And then it says here, but these nascent industries will take time to develop. So if you get something, no, it takes time to get the benefits from it. So We don't have anything written now, and we clearly say state-owned reforms, state-owned enterprise reforms, as well another vulnerability, and it said that a key program component will also include increases in politically sensitive tariffs and fees, which may restore profitability but could foster public discontent. So you see exactly what the challenges that we are having. So that is enough for Congress. I'm moving on now to the central bank. Right. I just wanted to show you quickly in numerical form um, what the Central Bank of Barbados says or has been saying about Barbados. Um, so mainly, the central bank has a new governor. Um, my analysis really is that the economy really has been performing it has been steady. It hasn't been doing anything really, but due to the pressure the debt to the IMF, right? And we show the charts already, the specific debt levels owed to the IMF, right? The IMF is now financing local budgets and local projects. So things like the IDB survey, the IDB paid for that, right? Direct projects, these people are directly paying for it, which means they have more control over what happens in terms of policy, right? Locally, what we've been experiencing really throughout the year was the government's main changes: one, to the NAS system, and two, mainly to the reformist on the praises. So that's why we lost the Grantley Adams International Airport that is going to be leased out for 30 years, right? We had to challenge them. Now they're coming out and saying that they sold to the Saudis. They're selling the BDF base for a hotel, right? Let's not forget the Bridgestone Development Project, where the entire strip from Bay Street, government headquarters included, straight down to Central Purchasing is about to be sold, right? The African Exim Bank is going to invest $100 million in the Bridgestone port, right? The Barbados Water Authority to be privatized. Transport Board was already privatized. National Housing was already privatized. The government is about to merge Rural and Development Corporation. CBC is about to be privatized as well, right? Um, so you're getting the drift. Basically, the IMF has reported that the government of Barbados actually implemented the pension reform much earlier than was necessary. I'm sorry, the IMF report is not showing up. I really don't know what happened. That's the most important one I really want to show you, but it's not coming on the screen. Um, but
What you can do, if you send me the link, or send it to Dave, and we'll try to, because we would like to see that. Yes, go ahead, Kemar.
yes, thank you. Um, yeah, where was I? Right. So basically, happening at the central bank, there's a new reporting system happening, right? So traditionally the central bank would publish information or supposed to publish factual information, right? But if you take a man who was the senior technical advisor from the IMF and put him as the governor of the central bank, I find it hard to believe that the information is going to be anything other than what the IMF says or wants, right? So we had this thing going on at the central bank about printing money, right? We don't literally print as much money as we used to up front, but we're printing it through the back door, through programs like the Boss program, Boss One and Boss Two, right? Which have not reached the success levels one bit. Um, and ah, Whoa. All right, so trying this thing again once more to show you. Um, hey, sorry, where was it? Right? So the central bank does not have the ability to fund projects anymore because they can't print the money. So that's why they had to go to the boss programs to gain money to build hotels, San. That's why the Hayat can't go up. That's why a lot of things don't happen because the Democratic Labour Party before borrowed money from the central bank, borrowed money from the NAS to build hotels, and to have capital investment. But we don't have that under the new regime going on, right? We don't have that under the new structural reforms that the government put in place. So we need to ask serious questions, specifically um, on why the government is selling most of Barbados, right? In this physical development plan, all of these changes, the areas that investment that the government is focusing on in the country, issues like water specifically, which is one of my pets as well, right? The Barbados Water Authority legislation. The IMF is telling them to give us sewage water. They're doing it. Right? I just saw in California they're seeking to implement the same legislation to give the people sewage water. Right? Santia Bradshaw, she left Barbados during the crop over week. Went to Europe, met with Dutch universities, Dutch private sector, Dutch water management companies. Came back to Barbados, This is Santia Bradshaw. This is the lady with the check right now, right? She and the government, IMF, remember this thing started with Ryan Strong, speaking to the IMF about reforming the system to a debt for nature swap, because that is a big thing, right? The debt for nature swap, I hope the government would use the debt for nature swap as an area of investment to allow $600 million to be freed up to build over or increase upgrades to a tertiary level sewage plant. Right? Barbados has never ventured into those type of investments, right? But because the grid is so tight, right, and because we don't have access to local investments, one, that's the reason why the government is trying to get digital ID because they need access to your savings, right? And two, they don't have the channels to finance them, like the central bank, the treasury bills, and the NAS. So you have to use the money from the European Bank and the IMF to help finance projects, but it is controlled spending, which means that the government can't spend it how they feel like. Those people are going to tell you specifically. So that's how you get Ryan Strong going to the IMF saying this is what he wanted to do and put the water in aquifers. So the other side to it is Santia went to Europe. She brought back the legislation. That is why St. Andrew is sold out. All of the East Coast is for sale, right? All of Bridgetown is for sale. That's how you get 3,737 hectare acres of land being freed up for, and they said it freed up for investment, right? Freed up to be sold, right? The IDB, as far back as 1994, forced ONAFA to pass a piece of legislation called the Investment Sector Bill. And that is how billions of dollars came into this country in foreign direct investment for ONAFA to then go on a borrowing spree. Our government, based off the reports from Congress, the IMF, and the central bank, wanted to do the same thing again, right? But the International Monetary Fund and the conditionalities they put actually tied the government's hands behind its back, right, to be able to finance its own initiatives to be dependent directly on what they want to do, right? So that is why Ms. Bradshaw could table the changes to the Barbados Water Authority Act That's why the Prime Minister, after she said that it was lying, could come and say that the water authority is not being privatized. And we saw in the newspaper very recently that the government is has shut down the Bormiston pumping station and is saying that the private sector will not be supplying the people in St. John and other parts with water. But ask yourselves this: where would the private sector be getting water from in Barbados? Right? Where? Tell me where would the private sector be pumping this water from? Right? So you're saying the government actually handing over the water authority to the private sector. We're saying no, even on the energy side, the government has actually destroyed the monopoly that water authority had, not water authority, that Light and Power had, to allow all of these new companies to be supplying electricity through these new PV systems. I don't know if you all see any amount of ads in the newspapers with the amount of companies not applying to supply electricity to Barbadians. So many. There's so many now that it is shocking. I one of them was the Prime Minister's brother, right? It is supplying electricity to the grid, right? So these new areas, remember, this all of this is under the guise of economy, under the guise of finance, under the guise of investment, right? So you can't let these things be lost on you in terms of economic discussions, right? This renewable energy thing. So that's why Light and Power has been giving Barbados trouble because the government is doing something called liberalization of markets. And liberalization of markets mean that again the government is drawing back to stop crowding out investment and making it more liberal for people to enter. So water, that's why private people are not getting involved in the supply of water in Barbados. Light and Power, the Emira was the sole thing along with the government, but now the government has broken that and allowing new players to come into the market, right? All of the industries, even in the hotel industries, you had no job growth. I'm not seeing any job growth. The claim unemployment is 7%. That is a lie. Right? There has been no sustainable job growth in, I mean, not even the central bank report no wants to show. Right? But there has been no sustainable job growth in any industry in Barbados. None whatsoever. And I will put everything that I own on that. Right? Jobs drive growth. Investment in terms of large capital drives growth. Don't have the central bank to give you that money. You don't have the NAS to give you that money. You don't have no big philanthropist to give you that money. Right? So there was no way possible. There's no way possible that there could have been any massive job growth because we're not even seeing any brands coming into Barbados, like the big international franchise brands or whatever that has large capital. If they came very minute. So like Koyman or Kuman or whatever the hardware store, things like that, Starbucks. No business in Barbados. Because if it did happen, we would have known. None of them actively provided close to CBT 300 to 400 jobs apart at one time. Because the government would have been bragging about that. Right? I got to end off on this point now, but the still on jobs, but let's look at the public sector now. The government sent home 1,200 people in the first year of the IMF program. They came back, they hired all of the ASH workers to send them home. They hired all of the COVID workers to send them home. Right? ASH and COVID were the only two departments where there was any type of job growth or any spurts in job growth. The same Santia Bradshaw again, right? She cut the program, the ASH program, because she was in charge of the program. And she came and she cursed the ASH workers and said that the ASH workers were misbehaving. And if they don't take their job serious, they're going to have to look at other options. But that was just the setup. And carrying you back again to the IMF program that was sent on December 7th, 2022, the two main pillars of that program was Still enterprise reform and pension reform, right? So people lost on pension, pension started to get cut, welfare started to get cut. We had the internal devaluation, so inflation went sky high. The prices of the supermarket were high, so even businesses were finding it hard to expand. So again, no job growth. The jobs and investment committee that was set up with ONAFA never came to fruition, but still we were $200 million in debt because of Ryan Strong went in and borrowing that money on false pretenses, right? And included in that same document was money to get jobs. But where are the jobs? None. So the wrapping up, the public sector, which was the main engine for job growth in Barbados under ONAFA's time, because ONAFA is who basically set us up for what we are going through now in terms of central government massively increasing its spend in the local economy, the investment, jobs, increasing government departments, staffing them up with a lot of people, giving people jobs, packing up national housing, packing up transport and works, packing up sanitation. Don't forget sanitation is about to be privatized as well too, but packing up sanitation. So all of the SOEs that ONAFA use and pack them up with workers, it actually helped the country because it gave people jobs, right? But what he did was to increase the transfers to a highly unsustainable level. And that is where the government has to be going to the market to be borrowing the absurd amount of money to maintain the public service because they can't send home all of these people so fast, right? So the IMF has said that the government has to agree to a yearly quota of people that has to go home. So that's why you're seeing a reclassification of people's job titles. That is why you're seeing the government sending home the temporary workers. That's why the government wants to put new workers on contract because again their hands are tied from the IMF, right? Because when that first time, the public sector has been heavily overstaffed. When the DLP came in, global financial crisis, they don't want to lose popularity, so they couldn't make the hard decision. But now the IMF is making the decision for Barbados as to how many people now have to go on through these SOE cuts, right? And again, it is in the IMF documentation that the cuts to the state-owned enterprises has to be prioritized between this is so the last quarter will be January, February, March. So the budget coming in March next year will be one of the
Yes.
most painful exercises that the country will go through because one, all those people going home from water authority, more people going home from sanitation. They're already sending home the people who don't want to sign over to the new NASSS. They're looking for smart ways to send them home, right? Some of the teachers in the education system will start going home because they're cutting the education budget. They're already driving a knife in the health budget already. The Ministry of Environment as well. So what you can see is a sustained spurt of job losses to basically right size and bring the economy back in line with increased debt payments, with increased debt, sorry, and increased interest payments and interest payments will be at a sustained basis of $1 billion per year every year that we got to repay 1 billion, every year straight up to 2035 we have to be paying a level of $1 billion in interest payments. No, if anything happens to Barbados, another pandemic, a lockdown, anything strange, these problems that we have are now magnified by 1,000.